I want to, let's say, show you how to see the dark side, let's say, referring to the Wodek's presentation. And therefore, there is my mission that is directly connected to the failed leadership conference idea behind. So the mission that I have conducting this presentation is showing you where to look for disease in your organization, where to look for them, how to solve them when you detect them. So let's move to the agenda. First of all, I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about the basis of the topic, what toxic leadership is considered about, and as you see, the confusions around the topic that I found during my research. Second of all, I'm gonna give you some definitions on the matter, and then we're gonna move to why do we really continue to follow toxic leaders, if we really do that. And then I'm gonna move to the damage caused by them. So, moving on to the basics. There are common shared characteristics of toxic leaders, and they're very common across all the books and across all the articles that I found. But surprisingly or not, I'm not gonna focus on them so much. I'm gonna do it a little bit in a reverse way. So you might previously encounter terms like bad leadership, dark leadership, destructive bosses, bad influence over an employee from a boss side. And basically, they are pretty much the same, and they have common characteristics with toxicity among leaders. And there is actually no consistent definition of the matter. What I found, I studied these 3 books and one of the toxic leadership in the US Army article made by US Army College. And I will try to give you a best view of toxic leadership that I possibly was able to find, deliver, and conclude in one. So, term toxic leadership has its roots in Marcia Wicker's Toxic Leaders When Organizations Go Bad from 1996. And there are not so many books, but there are many different approaches. So, it started with 3 possibilities who toxic leader might be. We started with enforcer, street fighter, bully. Then, on a bad leadership, on a very famous book from Barbara Kellerman, we moved to 7. And then the US Army joined in, and I'm just gonna remind you that this organization has over 1 million of people in it. So they came up with 18. And of course, it all makes sense. And each one of these has its own characteristics. But from the basis point of view, when you didn't encounter toxic leadership as it is previously, it's only making the matter more complicated. So, moving on to defining the matter, I studied my favorite book from what I've shown you before, The Allure of Toxic Leaders. And Professor Jean Lippmann I'm gonna help myself, thought that defining toxic leaders is an exasperating task at best, since my toxic leader might be your heroic savior. And she tried to study the cases, she tried to go deeper into literature and the psychological aspect of that, and she gave a very generic definition, but the most intuitive one, the one that I like the most. And that's that. So, toxic leaders are individuals who, by virtue of their destructive behaviors, and their personal dysfunctions inflict serious and enduring harm on others. Nevertheless, no matter if it's an one person, organization, country that they lead. And one remark before we move forward is that just because a leader is disorganized or inept doesn't mean that he's toxic. Some people simply lack leadership skills, and toxic leader, however, proactively engages in harming others, as the definition says. So, if widespread toxic and toxicity among the leadership wouldn't be a problem, I wouldn't be speaking to you right now about it. And as we know, leaders don't exist without the followers. At least this one first follower who's going to encourage the rest, then the second one, and so on and so on. So, why do we continue to follow them? I'm going to start with a little bit of a story which I found during one of the Jean Lippmann-Plumen's interviews, and that's about how she started to look deeper into the toxicity among leaders. So she knew a president of one of the, I believe, UK's more recognizable universities, and from her point of view, he was absolutely and thoroughly toxic. Although his board of trustees, all the men that supported him at the university, had a view that he's a great leader, and didn't see what she had in front of her eyes. And there was some kind of incident where his corruption and toxicity were, at least should be, absolutely clear. And the matter should be absolutely clear for all of the participants and everyone who saw him in this kind of incident. Jean doesn't go much into details. And what the board said about it. No, he's so charming. He should be just our representative, external representative. Of course, he can't be president after what happened. But we're gonna just give him some kind of external job. He will be representing us because he's so good at what he's doing. And then Jean says that she was absolutely shocked and didn't really know what is the idea behind it. How the people can be so blind and not see the toxicity, and still, if the man committed some kind of corruption, they're still standing behind him. And what she said during the interview is that she believes that we as a people, of course, we're mortal and we like to engage in noble enterprises that we will be remembered of. And what the toxic leader also happens to deliver to his followers is this fake kind of noble enterprise image. So they're saying that this thing that we're doing is really big, it's for the best, you're gonna be remembered. And moving on to the one of the 5 characteristics of why do we continue to follow the toxic leaders. First of all, we equate effectiveness with being a good leader. That's the most obvious reason that I found, albeit disturbing, because toxic leaders seem to get job done, at least in the short term. Nowadays, when we see our companies in a quarter-like perspective, we've got this 3 months, we publish some market data on how we're going, and it's all about this short-term productivity. The toxic leaders give a sense that they get the job done, but most of the cases it's with the cost of their employees. Let's say they're influencing their employees badly, so they deliver. As it was previously mentioned, that in the transactional style, in this toxic transactional style, they just ask for something and don't give the reward for it. Second of all, we value the wrong leader qualities. So, of course, we value strong, confident leaders, but often we confuse arrogance and narcissism for strength. And research shows that the worst leaders are just what Wodek showed us before, narcissist and over-arrogant. Third of all, we crave power. And what I mean by that is also based on Jean Lippman's research. She should suggest that followers enable and assist bad leaders. So not only they stay with them, but they also help them. And all too often, leaders, the toxic leaders above, they just give them what they want in return of their followership. They don't look at the needs of organization, they just look at their individual needs of what do I want and how this person can help me achieving that. That's how toxicity still can be existing among leaders. Fourth of all, we don't hold leaders accountable. And yeah, that's it. We often blindly place leaders on a pedestal and assume they will do the right thing just because they are leaders. And the last one of the reasons that I get for you is, I think, my favorite one, because that's the one that we are so good as a human. We rationalize, and we allow leaders to be above the rules. So it's very connected with this holding leaders accountable. We settle too easy. We say that if he or she is the leader, probably that's the right thing to do, what he's saying and what he's doing. And we settle down too easy, and instead of looking for good examples of leadership, we allow toxic leaders that are not so great for organization to hold their places, their chairs. And even more there's behind it. And what I would like to move on now is damage cost to employees, and not only to employees, because damage cost is actually the tool that toxic leaders use to still stay at their places. So conclusions from this particular slide are based on a recent study from University of Manchester's Business School. And what they did is they, let's say, took a closer look on how employees are affected by toxic leaders, toxic bosses. So I'm just gonna give you a few of the conclusions what they found. So first of all, it lowers the job satisfaction. That sounds pretty clear. If you've got a toxic person above you or in your let's say neighbor, it lowers your kind of satisfaction, self-satisfaction of your work. Second of all, it gives greater possibility of experiencing clinical depression. That's also connected. You are more likely to become overly critical of one another, and if you're more likely to do that for the first time, you're more likely to do it for the second time, and the circle goes on. More likely to take a credit for someone else's work, and they found that people under toxic bosses are behaving more aggressively towards each other, towards their colleagues. And they discovered that rude behavior like sarcasm and put-downs led people to experience mental fatigue. Consequently, employees had less self-control, and it made them go on the circle again. So these particular behaviors and consequences are just making themselves more strong. And it's not the first research on the matter. University of Michigan found similar results when examining the workplace incivility. And that's all, of course, affecting companies' organizational culture. So, what Gilles says, the real tragedy is that we choose to live by grand illusions rather than to face our fears. Hence, we fall into the clutches of toxic leaders who promise us the moon, knowing full they cannot deliver. In worst of the cases, toxic leaders believe in their own words and believe that they can deliver, which is just, let's say, very strongly connected to the triad, dark triad that was presented by Włodek before. So, what I believe is that, and what this presentation vision, and why I chose this topic in particular, is that better identification and further studies could well reduce persistence of toxic leadership among the organizations. And if you're not focusing on what toxic leaders do, how they behave, you often might mistake them with the ones that you treat as great leaders because they deliver, because the people really listen to them, so on, so on. So if you want to diagnose your organization, the best time to do it is right now. And remember, toxic leaders can remain in power only if their followers are uninformed and susceptible. And please stop being susceptible. Thank you, everyone.